Firstly, a couple of times before we start, to Shahina and to Mike for organising and facilitating this week. I know that those of you that have seen Michael in action already, or have seen other lessons in action, that you will have gained so much out of it and so much more for the rest of the week. Primarily we're here, my role here this afternoon is to welcome Michael back to BIS. We are delighted that you are here. We were just working it out. We're almost 3 years into lecturing in English at BIS, and we are definitely seeing the positive impact that it is having with our students. And it is brilliant now that we're bringing it down to year 3. Pete literally just said it's great to see children that have been engaging with Let's Think in English already, and that there is more interaction in the lessons. And I'm sure you're seeing that as class teachers as well. Michael, thank you again for coming to see us, for the input that you have given us to date and that you continue to give us. It really is making a difference to our learners and to our practice as teachers. So everybody, can we give Michael a very good round? Are you responsible for the Quality Street?
Yes, I got a very late message.
Thank you, Michael.
At least I can do, yeah. I was really busy at work and I got a message on a Monday from Shahina saying, could you buy Quality Street? I had a very small window of opportunity, which was 5 minutes to get it. My local Tesco Express had it, and that's why it's here, why we wouldn't be here. So you don't need to thank me too much. Okay, so nice to see you all. Shahina and Michael asked me whether or not I would look at metacognition with you, and I can understand why, because it's quite a tricky area. So in the next 50 minutes, what I'm going to try and do is give you a few tasks to do, because you know how we work in Let's Speak. I think you've got to do something to understand it rather than just the theory. And then after that, you're going to try and work through what does that mean for your students. And like everything we deal with, it won't be unfamiliar to you. So we're not saying to you, you don't do this. You do this already. We're just trying to explain to you, again, to think about how explicitly do you do it and when should you use it best. Does that make sense? So we're not trying to say you don't do it, never do that. Okay, so just to start with, if you're new to it, you've been teaching it for a while, this is what we call the pillars of Let's Think. And it's been there right from the mid-70s when Aileen Shea created CASE, the original programme. Really, they're like what we know make for effective teaching and learning, the pillars. If you look across lots of different forms of research, you'll find that they're there. We start with a preparation. It's interesting, recently cognitive science has become really big in education. So you take children into labs and you test them and you can get findings of it. But lots of things concur. It's still things that you would find when you work with children for 10 years in a classroom. Cognitive science tends to confirm what you find. What they've found really is that you have to build new knowledge on prior knowledge. And you all know that, don't you? You have to activate what they already know and then try and link it on for it to fit really well. And that's why in our lessons we use the preparation stage to see what do they know. Now there's lots of ways of doing this. What's becoming quite popular is multiple choices at the start to get a quick overview, and that works well. In ours, we listen to them, which is another way of doing it. You ask them a question, you walk around the room, you listen into your groups, you get the talk back to you, and you start to think, okay, that's where they are. You get to reveal stuff about them. So that's the purpose of it. The second stage we call social construction, and for that the key word is the understanding. So remember this, your children, there's a lot of talk about higher order thinking, and that's hard to define what that is, but you certainly cannot do higher order thinking about something you don't understand. Yeah? Impossible. You just go around in loops. So when you're doing this stage of the lesson, if you get quite a way through it and the students, the pupils don't understand, then you have to directly address it, just like you do in any other lesson. Explain something to them, clarify it, because it'll just fall. It'll fall away. They won't go any further. You're probably familiar with this bit. It's a bit like the trick part of Let's Think in English. I don't know if any of your pupils have got used to this yet, but sometimes when they get familiar, they start to predict it. So they never accept anything at face value anymore. I don't know if you've had that. They say, you're going to do one of those things, aren't you, where it's all different to what it seems. But we give them a kind of new problem, which requires them a new way of thinking. Again, I think it's becoming more and more popularised in education. Somebody spoke to me about 2 months ago and said, you've got to hear this guy, who I won't mention, because he talks about the pit, and you've got to struggle out the pit to learn. I said, oh yeah, Vygotsky and Piaget spoke about that quite a long time ago, actually. It's not a new idea. We all know, and I really think the longer I work in education, that's the really hard bit, is getting the difficulty right. Does that make sense? It's pitching it right, because you have so many variables in the classroom. You've got, in your case, about 24 pupils. They all need a slightly different level of difficulty. Sometimes it's too hard or too easy. So we did a conflict. But the two bits I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the metacognition, which is kind of the review of the learning, and the bridging. So that's going to be the main focus, the last two bits that get missed out. Okay, before we do a task, cognition is what enables us to do a task. It's what we think about. The metacognition is how we monitor and evaluate the task we're doing. So if you think about it, you've got dual processing, you've got something that you give to do the task, and at the same time you might have a way of evaluating how you're doing. It takes time to develop that, but that's the distinction. Cognition, your thoughts for it, meta about it. Now, with all these things, it's best if you do something. And I appreciate that on Tuesday at 3:15, this is going to sound testing and maybe fill some of you with a sense of horror, but that's okay, it's for the greater good. Yeah? So you're going to do it. What I'm going to do is we're going to do a task, and we're going to do it two ways. Okay? We're going to do it first pretty much alone and see how you get on with it, and then you're going to get a chance to do it together, and we're going to give some time to plan, monitor, and evaluate how you do it as well. This is what it's going to be. I'm going to read you out a list of numbers. You can't write down the numbers. You're going to have to try and memorise them in order. Sound okay? Yeah. So we read them out. I'm not going to. Just to reassure you, I'm not going to pick on any of you. I'm not going to sort of cold call on you and say like how many you remember. You won't be feeling that way. But you can just read them out and we'll together sort of put your hand up how many you remember. But you've got to be in order. Does that make sense? Go in sequence. Okay. Let's have a first go. Then we'll do it a second time. Here's the numbers. In total, there are 9 digits. Okay? 7, 4, 6, 8, 3, 5, 1, 7, 9. I love doing this task. You see everybody's faces, and when they're starting to panic and seeing it all goes, like, oh, I can't take any more in. Okay. Don't discuss it. Don't discuss it. We'll try and do it together. Just on your mind before we call them out. Just you don't tell anybody else yet. Think yourself roughly how many do you think you can do in order? Roughly how many? Just to keep that in your mind. We'll talk about it in a second. Okay. Right. Let's see. Can we do it together? First 3 digits are
7, 4, 6.
That's a good start. I'll tell you a good story in a minute about this. Maybe let's go for 5 digits. 7,
4, 6, 8, 3.
Okay. 5,
1, 7,
9. Okay. So in amongst that sequence, some of you could get all the way, some of you couldn't get very far. We outside of Let's Think English, I look after 22 schools in Islington now, and we look after PD. and we took all the staff together in a big, it's called a Uni Chapel in Islington. Maybe if you've ever been to London, you might have been there. They do concerts there. We had 800 staff there, and we did this exercise. And we had one of our head teachers was there, and we sort of said to the 800, who of us can remember all the digits? And thinking, no, you would dream of suggesting they could. And of course, he put his hand up. No problem at all. So, okay, Andrew, can you give us the first two? And he got them wrong. Andrew, they've never lived it down. Okay, now, let's try it again a different way. Is on your tables this time, I want you to give yourself a score of between 1 and 10 of how you think you'll do with a task like that. You're going to evaluate yourself to start with. 1 to 10, 1 being you're awful at this, you find it difficult. 10, you're going to remember all the digits and do it again. And just explain to somebody next to you why you think the score you have. Okay, do that first. Okay, you all had a quick go. You all had a quick go. So, you've had a go at evaluating yourself. What I didn't let you do last time, before you undertook the task, what I'll let you do this time, is ask any questions about the way I'm going to do it. Was there anything anybody would like to ask? Any clarifications about the task? What people sometimes ask is, will I do it quicker or slower? Depends on how much panic there is in your faces normally. But I'll try and be consistent. Try and do it. Sometimes people just want to clarify that you have to remember the numbers in order, which you do.
Smallest to biggest.
No. That would be an extra challenge. But you can do that with a task, clarify. Okay, next thing I want to do before we undertake the task again is on your tables, can you think of some strategies that you might use to remember as many digits as possible? Because there are ways of doing this. It's not random. So some ways might be more successful than others. So half of your tables, how you might go about this when you undertake the task. Have a quick talk. What might you do to remember more?
After 5.
Okay, shall we come back together? Shall we do the last one? Okay, can you just call out any strategies you think might help when you're trying to remember a long list of digits like this?
Turn it into a story.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit more.
So like the 7 was the first digit, so in my head like 7 wonders of the world, I'll win one of those, and then there was a square, and then an octopus I had in there for 8. I don't know why you just like, but you were saying it was like quite a bit random. Well, it was random.
Yep. So story or associations might work, linking something to it. So the 8 with the octopus, you can see how that might make sense. Okay, that's one. Another way?
I was saying to my group, I saw a program about the woman that holds the record for memory. She holds about 4 different records, and she turns digits into letters. So this is something where she's obviously prepared for it, whereas we aren't. So I'm not sure if we can quickly do this, devise our own method. But she turns them into letters and then turns them into 3-letter words, and then does what Greg was saying and turns them into images, which she then puts on a journey.
Okay.
And takes the way through. So there's like loads of
What's the number
strategies that she
then?
puts all. I can't even remember what the program is.
Okay, so this we'll just come back to that because it sounds like an interesting strategy, but we've got something to come back to called conditional. So some strategies might work better at some places than others. So we'll come back to that. Any other ones that you can think of? Yeah?
If you know the number of digits that come, then you can group them. So you could do 3-digit, 3-digit, 3-digit. It's a lot easier. Remember 746, 835.
Okay.
But you can do it like that.
So I think it's called chunking. Yeah. So you rather than trying to remember 9 single digits, you can remember them in the hundreds. Would be a way. Anything else? Yeah.
Visualise putting them into a phone keyboard.
Okay. So some form of visualization. Some other ones that people.
I visualised it as a longer number. Didn't break it down as
Yeah.
such, but I had to like see it in my mind written down.
And then sort of record it from that. Sometimes teachers will say repeating it. So as you go through, did anybody do that? Sometimes people say you see them using their fingers, sort of placing things on their fingers. It's all different ways. Now we're going to do it once more, and that'll be the end of numbers. I don't normally deal with numbers; it's unusual for me. But this time, choose one of the strategies you've heard and have a go and see whether or not it helps you. Yeah? Choose one of the strategies you've heard. See which one. Everybody got one in mind for these? Okay. Last time the numbers, different numbers.
Still 9.
Still 9 in total. Clarifying. Okay. 2, 8, 6, 9, 4, 1, 8, 4, 7. Okay, just on your table share, see how many you can recall on your table. Okay, maybe a go. So, what have we been doing in a sense? Okay, I think we've been looking at the difference between trying tasks where you just automatically have a go and being a strategic learner. And I'm trying to think where this is fit for your school. I was just looking straight ahead of me. You've got the BIS, inquiry, reflection, perseverance, and this will be centrally linked to it. This is really what we're talking about. It's inquiry, reflection, perseverance, and how you take on tasks. So when we talk about metacognition, there's different stages of metacognition, and you've undertook all of them there the second time around. I think often we do learning where we just do it. We don't pause enough to get ready for it. And remember, there's remarkable headlines about metacognition because it can give you 10 additional months progress. It's what Education Endowment Fund say, particularly for low and middle attaining students, because it's what they struggle to do is be strategic. They do things kind of impulsively in the moment. They go through. So you've done them. Decorative metacognition is what do we know about the task and what do we know about ourselves as learners, and they're both equally important. I would argue your pupils need time to reflect and to consider even their attitudes for tasks sometimes. What's hindering them? Why don't they want to do maths? Yeah? And I don't mean that you as teachers are often aware of the barriers they have, but the pupils aren't aware of the barriers themselves and what's triggering the barriers. Does that make sense? And that's what we mean by decorative metacognition, knowledge of yourself. Did any of you feel anxious when I said that you're going to read out a long list of numbers? You're going to, yeah? And that hinders your performance in anything. Makes sense? Immediately you've got barriers to it. So you have to deal with this. You go through. You've got to get them to think about how good am I at this? Why is it hard? You've got to talk about it. We know this is difficult for you. Yeah? Here's some strategies to go through. So that's the first bit you did, when you gave yourself a number score. Yeah? And by explaining to somebody, release a little bit of pressure. The other part, which you didn't do too much of, is you have to have knowledge of the task. So if we take an example, and you do this all the time, we take an example, students, we want you to write a fiction story in a fantasy setting. They can't do that unless they have knowledge of the task. They've got to have really clear knowledge. So again, with that task, you need to know, you've got to remember its sequence. It would help you to know the pace that I read it at. You know, if I did it much quicker, you might need a different strategy. So you need clarification about what you're doing. Does that make sense? That's the second part, decorative. Then it's procedural. So in a room here, lots of you are taking on different ways of tasks, weren't you? You had different strategies you're trying to do. So that's your procedural knowledge, like how can I do that? By sharing it, we can then evaluate what's the best way of doing it. What's the best way of doing it in this condition? But it's a reflection on the how, not just the what. Yeah? We're not saying this is what you've got to do. We start to think about this is how you might do it and which of those approaches might be best. Again, does that make some sense? Yeah? So you're slowing down learning. You're almost taking the learner above themselves to look down, consider how they might do it. So the actual recommended way, it was an old test around learning. Somebody called Erickson, who does deliberate practice, took an undergraduate who had no particularly special talent for memory. People think it's a memory test, it's not. But what they've done is just give the digits to the undergraduate, and they did something which you know as teachers, every time they get to a block. So if you can remember, say 10 digits, when you got to number 11, you couldn't remember it, they go back 2 every time. Ring a bell with teaching, jump back a couple of steps, and start again to get there. That's what they done. And they kept going. What he did was he started to chunk the numbers, put them into big units, and then he put them onto trees. And he became the world record holder for this. He remembered 145. Interestingly, he then taught another undergraduate, rather than the professor did, the undergraduate told another undergraduate what to do, and he broke that guy's record a lot quicker because he's passing on the knowledge. The second one was a marathon runner. He said chunk them into marathon running times. They could remember to go through. But it's important, the procedural part, like how do you do it? But there's one more bit to it. So if you think about all the strategies that were shared, they all had their merits, but were they all necessarily best for that task? Is the conditional part, which is what's the best strategy for the task I'm taking? And sometimes I think what's seen in the UK a lot is kids are given this and this, but not this. They have knowledge, don't have so much knowledge of themselves. They have knowledge of the task, quite often a lot. There's sometimes pause, particularly say maths, like how might you go about doing this? But it's this last bit, the evaluation of which one's the best for this one, because it would vary, wouldn't it? From task to task, it varies what's best. So this is what we try and develop with them. This is an easier way to show it. Yeah? A much easier way to show it. We're going to try and develop their knowledge of task, of strategies and self, and then they'll use that to plan, monitor and evaluate what they do. Yeah, that's the loop. To get more knowledge of those and they use it to plan, monitor, evaluate. I don't think it's going to be such a problem here, guessing, I don't. But it becomes a problem in the UK because if you're going to work like this, you have less output. Does that make sense? You've got to slow the learning down a lot to start with. You've got to spend time in it, kind of evaluate, considering. So you, for example, in my field, the kids might do less writing. The argument is the quality of their writing will go up long term because they're reflecting more on the best way of doing it. That's the trade-off, and that's why it's problematic sometimes. Okay, we're going to do one more task, and no more tasks after that. Tasks are the best. Okay? As far as it's possible, I want you to pair up with somebody next to you as far as possible. If there's three, then do it as three. Two A's and a B, yeah? Pair up. Okay, everybody done that?
Okay. Anybody that wants these slides, they're on the system later on. You don't have to
We'll
like that.
We'll send it all to you. Okay, what we're going to do, some of you have done this kind of lesson for different images. It's going to be describing images this time, describing images. And you're going to take turns describing the image. So just decide who's going to go first, describe the image. Who's going to describe the second one, as long as you've done that. Okay, all good. So this means the person who's going to describe the image in a minute needs to look at the screen, the person who's not needs to look away. There we go, well done. One looks at the screen, one looks away. Right, great stuff. Okay, those who are going to describe it, how it works, I'll put the image up for you for 30 seconds. They're going to take it down and then you describe it to your partner. Yeah? Okay, so here's the image. Don't describe it now. Okay, describe that to your partner. Okay, so we had go. Okay, everybody turn around now. We'll let you see the two images, the actual image your partner's describing to you. Okay, so what we're going to do, you probably guessed this, what we're going to do is we're going to do the same task again, although the person who didn't describe it last time is going to do it this time. But before you start this time, based on your experience with the person described this time, have a chat with your partner about what you might recommend they do when looking at the image and how they might sort of plan ahead how you might describe something. It's not going to be the same, but it'll be similar. Be similar kind of image. So before you do it, partners, any ideas you might have about how you might effectively plan some, how effectively you might describe to somebody, yeah? Have half a minute to plan it ahead now, what you might do. Okay, just before we move on, would it be fair to say plan would fall underneath inquiry? That would be something central you would do when you're developing inquiry skills with your pupils. That plan would be... Yeah, no. I think it falls underneath it, doesn't it? It's part of it. If we're going to break down what inquiry is, plan would always be part of inquiry, wouldn't it? You'd have a plan. It would be something that you would do like this, yeah? You don't need to mark it out. It's not what we get. Okay, right. What we're going to do now, we're going to swap around. Partner looks, person to go first, time looks away, yeah? Okay, same thing, you're going to get half a minute to look at it, but after you have the half a minute, I'm going to say to you, you're going to get an extra 20 seconds to then think about how you're going to explain something, see? So you get half a minute to look closer at it, then I'm going to pause to give you a little bit extra this time to think about how you're going to convey it to your partner. Okay, here we go. Okay, those looking at the board, I want you to close your eyes now, so you stop looking at the image and think about how you can best describe it to your partner, how you're going to plan to do that. Okay, you're going to describe it to your partner. I want you to do two things. I want you to check in with your partner quite a lot. How am I doing? Get some feedback. And the partner also give feedback around how they describe it to you. Okay, describe it to your partner. Off you go. Okay, let's come back together last time. It's going to be last time. Okay, the last thing we're going to do, and then I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more of the research to end with, is I'm going to show you the image now. And I want the person who was describing it to evaluate themselves how they think they did, and then also if the partner to give some evaluation back, some feedback on what went well, the classic, even better if you mentioned the chair, that was right in the middle of the picture, or whatever the case may be. Okay, here it is. Together, how did your partners do it describe it? So again, you see we did a task two different ways. One way you're kind of diving in, so force you to just describe it. The other way takes a lot longer, doesn't it? Kind of planning, the monitoring, the pausing to kind of think about what you do, and the evaluation together. But my suggestion would be, this is why metacognition has been part of the Let's Think program in the mid-70s and becoming popular now, but it's always been there, is that it's crucial. It's crucial because the question could be, think about a different setting for the task. It wouldn't have to be an image. So the important bit is not whether or not you get the answer right. That is important. It's not just that. It's how you're getting there. Yeah? And how you're monitoring your progress, and how you're evaluating afterwards, because that's the transferable part that will give longevity to their learning. They can take from moment to moment they have to do. It does fit particularly neatly under your inquiry reflection. I mean, reflection's a monitoring and evaluation process, and perseverance, because I think from the monitoring and reflection you get perseverance. We have a big problem in the UK where schools have adopted an approach where they put posters up that says things like growth mindsets, or if you try hard in big, bright, colourful letters, then you'll do really well. I really think it has minimal impact, surprisingly. But the poster doesn't do it by itself. Children will learn those skills when you work with them in those ways, when you challenge them, when you get them to monitor why are you finding it hard, when you can support them to persevere. And that's at the heart of the metacognition, is knowledge of self. That's what we're talking about, knowledge of self. Does that make sense? Yeah? Can I explain to you? And it's not about reading, it's about everywhere. You're the best place to think about how that applies to different subject areas. Okay, understanding what it is, then very quickly some sort of key points about the research around it, how we do it. Really simple things. We have these in our Let's Think lessons. We have metacognition crib sheets, we call them. And it's just little reflective journals really they can do. So at first we thought, what on earth is that? Massive egg timer. First we thought, then we realised what's hard, what's easy, other people helped me. This kind of language being regularly used helps into the plan, monitoring, evaluation. Some interesting bits. I'll send this to you. It will be in the pack to have a look at. But if you are interested in more, I can send you lots and lots of papers on this. Some that you won't wish to read. You can have them, and some accessible. This one's a really good starting point. Education Endowment Fund in the UK is a charity that's set up to try and narrow the attainment gap. It gets a lot of money, and it tries to look at what works in education. Surprise, surprise, it's really hard to find something that works across the board in education. around because things don't transfer from setting to setting. And I think the big thing about this is the teacher's agency. So it depends how much you believe in something. All my experience training was, you've got to believe in it to make it work, to go through. But they come up with this, and they have like 7 steps that will support your pupils in metacognition. I might read them out to you just in case you can't see them very well. So 1 is acquiring a professional understanding of it. They would argue you need to spend, and they've got tools online, you need to spend time as staff really exploring what it is and understanding. I guess maybe something like this is a little start point building on what you already know. The second one is that you explicitly teach the pupils, explicitly, listen to the word, it's not soft touch, you explicitly teach them how to plan, monitor and evaluate full learning. Yeah? Very deliberate. You will adopt it frequently in your lessons and give value to it. Not just an add-on, it will be central to what you do. The third one is you model your thinking to your pupils. Really valuable. Yeah, if I was going to do this, I would be thinking about. I think for it to be successful, it would look like, because sometimes they just won't have the knowledge of the task, you know that bit? They don't have it, so you give it to them. You let them come into the minds, in essence, the minds of the expert. They go into your mind, so they can then understand things better for themselves. So it's not all about discovery, it's also about directly telling them things too. Fourth one, it comes up time and time again, is that you only really plan, monitor and evaluate when a task is challenging enough. It's got to have a certain demand to it. If it's easy, you don't need to plan, monitor and evaluate. You already know it, why would you bother? No, let's plan, monitor and evaluate how we do our shoelaces. No, because I can do them. No, I don't need to. If you ever try and do it with walking, you kind of can't walk after a while. You spend too long consciously thinking about how you walk, it all goes awry. It's not the right thing, because it's a natural thing to do. But some of them, it's difficult things. Yeah, value the difficulty of it, and think about plan, monitor, evaluation with that. Promote and develop metacognitive talk. So it won't really surprise you. It's not our presentation, it's not our here, but the talk is the crucial part. Yeah. They need to share the different ways through talk of how they do it. Talk underpins all of these things. It's got to be done through talk. Talk is the best tool for it, because you can change, you can adapt, you can move quickly, and then you can put it down on paper as plans. But do it the other way is not the best way, we'd suggest. Explicitly teach them how to organise and effectively manage their learning independently. You know, a big movement towards being an independent learner, we have to give them ways of doing that. Again, you've got to be quite explicit. Not to say, no, I want you to be able to do all this stuff for yourself, because you've got to kind of guide them there and go through it. And last one, just the support for the teachers. Does that make sense? I mean, they're pretty strong recommendations to look at. And what we do when we do the work in the UK is maybe something we'll do later on. So I do just this training for schools where they do LT, something they just want to do metacognition afterwards, is to say, okay, use this to kind of monitor where you are and audit where you are. Maybe it's year groups or at a whole school, it's down to you, but it's an interesting tool. You've got an audit tool online. You can look at it and say, look, these are the areas we're really strong in, there'll be lots. This is an area we can do a bit better, we can target it. Okay, last couple of ones. It goes back to the talk one. Simple questions you can ask. And I guess when we do this, let's see in English sometimes, people think, well, that's kind of obvious, but the impact is enormous. Why do you think that? Such a straightforward question, massive impact. Tell us how you got that answer. You can see review after review says, any time you encourage self-explanation, pupils will do a lot better. Just pausing them to almost explain to themselves how they're doing what they're doing. It has, if anyone's interested in the research paper, has a massive impact. So everybody can adopt, you're doing it already, you can adopt it tomorrow morning. Yeah? Explain to somebody else what you can do. It's that simple, 30 seconds. Or talk your idea out loud to yourself. It strengthens the cognition, gets them ready for it when they go through. Obviously, what the authors stress is it's got to be difficult, they talk about. Again, don't waste your time, we say this all the time. You know, LT, we try and make things hard, and therefore it's worth talking about. The other one is, they also need live feedback at the point of explanation, so you give them some feedback, like, yeah, that seems like a good way of doing it, or maybe you want to think about it slightly different, which those who've been teaching Let's Speak in English, that's what we do, don't we? We listen and say, oh yeah, there might be something there. Send them a way of thinking about it, they've got a different way of looking at it there. Okay, last one on this, and I think this is important for the children, is it's an odd thing, but in our experience, they understand better how somebody else's thinking is changing than their own. It's really, because it just becomes them when they change their thinking, but when they see it in somebody else, they can monitor it a little bit either. So when they're new to it, get them to kind of do lots of evaluations of each other's, like how's your partner's thinking changed today, or in your group of 3, talk about how you think somebody else has changed, think of change, and it helps them, and then they become more aware of the change themselves, and they go with it. Okay, so going back to Let's Think in English, because a lot of that's in Let's Think in English, but generalised, I'm trying to explain to you like what we think people use it day to day. This is what a lot of schools do, and you may wish to do this. They build metacognition walls. They give high value to the planning, monitoring, evaluation that go in. So this one here, which you can see, after the LT lesson, they occupy it with post-it notes of strategies, and they're given categories to organise it around. So asking critical questions or using textual evidence. They make a comment directly on the lesson they were doing. Down here, with the colours, you can see that's a monitoring, isn't it? How well have we understood it today? What's gone well? What's difficult for us? But it's giving emphasis to that the whole time. Another one, it's not so easy to see. It's a bit more of a basic one for younger kids. It's like, I'm thinking about, I'm wondering, words like that, and they build their list on that. There's strong evidence that the metacognition can happen from early years all the way up. Yeah? We've got a colleague in Let's Think Forum who's a specialist at University of Swansea, who deals with early years, and they use lots of recordings, and you can see children being encouraged to metacognition from a very, very young age that can do it. So the earlier always the better. A couple more, nice little wonder wall. Again, there's a kind of entry route to it. And you see how it works, yeah? So you populate post-it notes, and then what it tends to do is once they start to get some strategies, you might type it up, laminate and put it down. We're kind of agreeing on this, it seems, lesson after lesson. And then the important bit is that you don't just use this in Let's Think in English. You see? It's not just, we don't just do plan, monitor, evaluate, Let's Think in English. So you say, okay, let's go back to that in other lessons, and you occupy it and populate it as well in other lessons. It'd be an ongoing, it's a true working wall. It's a real working wall of our thinking as we go through it. Okay, I'm aware of time. There's quite a nice one for the young ones, and I think a few people have mentioned this. Of course, you also need to give them language for things like this, don't you? So down the bottom, you give them, some sentence starters, which I know some of you mentioned. You've got to do Let's Think in English. I think it's a good thing. They don't have the vocabulary yet to explain how they disagree. Give it to them so it becomes natural. You do the same there. I'd avoid doing this, where it's just so busy it makes no sense. It's a complete distraction. I can't imagine any child really know what that means. Go through it. So, that kind of simplistic. Let them occupy it, their thoughts, be a celebration. Right, that's the metacognition bit done. Shahina's thinking to be 10, and I know I only need 5, so that's fine. So, the other bit we're going to touch on really quickly is the last part of the lesson, because it's really important in Let's Think in English. And I think it's a legacy of our programme. We haven't emphasised that enough. It's become apparent in the last 2 years in the UK in particular that we haven't emphasised this last stage and what it means enough. And I think after this there might be some work for you to do in your year teams, but it will really benefit the programme. So we talk about bridging, and you remember from that structure it happens after the lesson ends. So we end with metacognition, and then we move on to bridging. The idea of bridging is applying what they've learned in LTE in another setting. Yeah? So you could almost call it applying what they've done in LTE to your day-to-day learning. We've found over time it's massively beneficial to map the lessons into your curriculum. Yeah? And I know probably you've started to work and consider that it has massive benefits for 2 reasons. Firstly, they carry more prior knowledge into the lesson. So imagine if they're doing fairy tales and you then do Halva, folk story. They carry more for the concrete preparation. They're already there. Some of you saw me struggling a bit trying to teach a Langston Hughes poem today because the idiom was unusual, the context was unusual. And I was speaking to Mike afterwards. But somewhere in year 5 and 6, there's a unit around South Africa and segregation is there. So, with a little bit of time and planning, I know I was doing it just to model it, but if you put it there, it's a completely different lesson. Yeah? Because they're going to bring more prior knowledge, they've got more to go with and reactivate. The other part of it is, afterwards, they then can use what they've learned in LTE to understand the genres or text types they go through. So I'd say, I'm sure you've started to do that, but certainly a bit of work to really consider the mapping, because it will benefit. These are some examples of what might be beneficial to show you more bridging. So we sometimes do live bridging with them, which is, one of the LT lessons is the window. Does people taught that one? It's quite a nice one where a kid looks out the window and so forth. But what the teachers do is they map them, they link them to what they're studying day to day. So they make direct comparisons. This is the point. The thinking needs to be generalised. It needs to go from one particular moment into something general over time. So it's as simple as, you know, you would say to them, what similarities are there between a window and a void and striped pajamas, as an example. So that's what they're studying. And then what they're doing the transference of what they can take from LTE to elsewhere. Same as some other ones. When, you know, lots of lessons we work on them with the idea of the story mountain, you know, the 5 stages. And when they explore that in LTE lesson, of course, you generalise by saying, okay, remember the story we read yesterday, or, you know, the next time you meet another story, you go back over again, because the LTE should be like a filter. It should help them to recognise the pattern when they see it again. And then finally, just a couple of practical examples. So bridging can look like this, and it's worthwhile doing different bridging. So one classic way of doing bridging is to get them to write something afterwards. Yeah. So this is Lulu, and the kid has wrote the response from the mother back to Lulu in the poem. Used 4 lines per stanza, rhyme, and to capture the voice of a young child quite neatly. So there's a way of doing it. Writing is one way, but not necessarily the best way. Other ways, this is an example from a year 2 class, stroke 3 in the UK, is you get them to sit the task again, but alone. So if any of you taught this one, it's the one where the fishes lose their hats. If you taught that one, it's quite a nice lesson, I think. And one part is what happens behind the reeds. Now, you know what we believe in is talk and constructing things together strengthens their cognition. But part of what you do afterwards you can do is just give them one bit of the task to study and say, now do that by yourself. And it'll give you a chance to assess what's sticking with them and what's remaining. And one final example, I'm going to be on time, is this. So as they go up to school, you give them all the questions again. So every question we set in the LT lesson, give them all of them, and you say to them, okay, choose the one you want to answer by yourself and have a go. The answer should be stronger because they've already drafted it together. But it's very interesting because quite a few teachers have adopted this way of doing it for interesting reasons in 1 or 2 cases, but well-intentioned. And they talk about, there's a hierarchy of questions really in LTE. It goes up. And over time you can see what questions do the pupils go for. You know, kind of monitoring. Are they always going for the easy one? We can try and get them to move up and go through. But it helps them. The final stage, remember, is, and this is what you want from the program, is you want, hopefully, the 8 lessons I've done, 7 of them went forward quite well, and the kids were talking, discussing, moving forward with the text, understanding it more deeply, but it's still got to stick with the individual, hasn't it? It's got to stick with the individual. So it's the last bit of the bridging, mapping it, referring back to it day to day, and maybe setting up tasks, not every lesson, but occasionally it goes through. I am on time. I hope that's kind of helpful as a recap. They're the 2 that everybody gets stuck on, really, metacognition and bridging. I think the idea was to throw the floor open to any questions that anybody has.
Don't be shy now.
Okay. Nothing? Well, great. Yeah, I hope it's been helpful. I must say, probably a chance to say to everybody, I think it's amazing watching it here. And I think it's probably to do with the caring part. There's such a sense of care in the rooms, and it makes the group work in particular thing like really quite something, the way they look out for each other. So the ethos you build is like perfect. We spend a lot of time working with schools on building the environment and then the cognition. Does that make sense? Like a lot of times, so you've got to change this first before they do the thing. They've got to be safe. They've got to be happy to share. It's got to be non-critical. We spent ages. Here, we never had to do that because you created that. So hopefully where we can help you a bit is the cognitive development with the program, but you've got the other bit down to a T, so yeah, it looks great. So thanks ever so much.
Yeah, I think if we could just say a huge big thank you to Michael. I know having And Michael, here now, this is the fourth year, Michael, isn't it? We've really embedded it now right across the junior campus, and this is down to year 3. I think it's given us a great platform, and as you said, the next stage for us is mapping the curriculum out, where we really are marrying those standalone LTE lessons with what we're doing on a daily basis, and I think we're so far along the lines, just at very next stage. What I loved about this today was the fact that you've taken us away from an LTE overview here and you've given us a bit of metacognition. I think I shared something with Neil from our broadsheets newspaper in Australia, The Australian, which looked at the Australian education system and how it's very much inquiry based now, and how our education system is very strong because we're holding up the rest of the world above us. And that's something that's really coming out to me, the explicitness in the way we teach, I think, is vital. So thank you very much to Michael. Thank you very much to Shahina for organising. Tomorrow's a day where you're over in secondary. Is that right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So they're nowhere near as smart as us.
You've got a bowl here.
Yeah. So I do apologise. I apologise in advance. Yeah. She won't tell anyone. Thanks to Michael also for being the shadow of Michael over the last couple of days. So Michael, thank you very much for that.
Very well.
He's here for questions if you do have anything.
There you go.
So, you're free to
Take the sheets and it's a good life.